Hello, everyone. I'm Abby, and today we'll be talking about movement breaks in elementary classrooms, so specifically incorporating sensory strategies in those classrooms. Like I said, my name is Abby Faust. I'm an occupational therapy student at UAB, and this is my final project. So thank you for being here. Thank you for helping me out. Also helping me is Dr. Groger, who's the OT in Limestone County Schools, as well as Dr. Cunningham, who is one of my academic professors. So, today we'll mostly be talking about the sensory system, sensory strategies in the classroom, and movement for students, specifically movement breaks, which is what my project is all about. So, as far as the sensory system goes, you know that we have those 5 basic senses that everyone knows about, but OTs also focus on 3 others. We have proprioception, which is an understanding of the body's physical position in relation to the environment. Vestibular, which is the body's understanding of its position in space, and interoception, which is the body's internal feelings such as hunger and the need to go to the bathroom. Today, we'll primarily be focusing on proprioception and vestibular because those are the senses that are affected by movement. So, when we think about sensory interventions, you might hear the term sensory seekers or sensory avoiders, and I've heard it explained in an analogy such as cups. So, we have a different cup for each of our different senses, and everybody's cup is a different size, everybody's different senses has a different size cup. So, you might hear someone being a sensory seeker, and these people are going to require a lot more stimulation for their cup to be filled or for them to be regulated. And then if they're a sensory avoider, then they're not going to need as much stimulation. And in fact, they might be overstimulated very easily. So we see a lot of times that sensory seekers, we might see proprioceptive sensory seekers. So these are the kids that when you're walking down the hallway, they're leaning up against the wall because they need that extra point of contact on their shoulder. Their feet, that input is not enough on their feet. They need that on their shoulder to really feel regulated, and a lot of times they don't even know that they're doing it until you call it out. You say, get off the wall. And then we also have sensory avoiders. A lot of times we see auditory sensory avoiders. So that's the ones where it's a big loud noise or there's lots of talking in the room. It gets overstimulating. So when it comes to sensory strategies in the classroom, before we get into some of those ideas that I have, I want to look at this pyramid we have here. This is the Taylor and Trott Pyramid of Learning. And it looks a little complicated at first, but I'll break it down for you, where we have the academic learning is at the very top of the pyramid. So basically this is saying that everything below academic learning, that all has to be in place for us to learn. And so if you notice, sensory systems are at the bottom. So specifically the proprioceptive and vestibular systems are down there at the bottom. So if those things aren't regulated, then students are not going to be able to learn. And a lot of times that's why we see these behaviors is they've been sitting in their seat for 2 hours, or they need to go to the bathroom, or they just don't have the input that their body needs and their body is yearning for, so they act out in these bad behaviors. So my challenge is, instead of addressing the behavior, let's address the sensory ahead of time and see if that affects behavior at all, because of course behavior builds on top of the sensory system. So when I saw this image, it really brought a lot to light and really demonstrated that well for me and explained it well. So some ideas we might have are for sensory strategies in the classroom are adjust your lighting. String lights and natural lighting, all of that is super effective. These fluorescent lights are super bright and overstimulating for a lot of students, and for me included, for a lot of adults too. So you can play calming music, allow students to take a sip of water before you start a longer period of instructional study, and let them, that gives them that oral stimulation. Provide some fidget toys, that's that touch sense that we're stimulating there, and then also help students regulate through structure. Being organized and being regulated ourselves is going to do wonders for their regulation and for their involvement in the lesson. And finally, movement. So all of these ideas here are just little hints of things that we can do for each of our different senses, but movement is impacted. It impacts the proprioceptive and vestibular senses. So as far as movement for students, it's kind of an issue a lot of the times because Common Core standards, a lot of the times there's so much pressure on students and teachers to be in math and reading and English and all of these Common Core classes that you take away recess, and you don't get that structure that you need, or you don't get that stimulation that you need, as far as the movement side of it goes. And so that's a big problem. Studies say that 70% of American students do not get the recommended amount of movement in their day. And so one thing that we can do, if adding in recess or adding in more PE time is not in your control, add movement into your instructional lesson. So that can look like maybe you spell out the words with your hips, or maybe you have them crawl to their next station, or stand up to, each table stands up to get their back something out of their backpack, or maybe if you're talking about the rising action, the climax, and the falling action of a story, you have them stand up and then jump and then sit back down as they're reading that story. So those lessons are really enforced through movement. So studies say that students need to be out of their seat every 20 to 30 minutes, which feels like a lot, but if you sit still for 30 minutes or for an hour, your body needs to stand up and move around. You need to stretch your legs and all of that. So that's what researchers recommend, is 20 to 30 minutes you're getting up and moving around. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to do a movement break every 20 minutes, but at least get up and throw something away and just kind of streamline that for all of your students. You can also incorporate movement break videos, which I will be creating in this project, and we'll talk more about that in just a second. And I know what you're thinking. Is movement a distraction? Like, every time I get my students out of my seat, they're moving around, and then I can't calm them down and all of that. And that is true, but structured movement, so there's unstructured movement, which would be like at recess where they're just running around playing, that kind of thing. It's not a task that they're given. Structured movement during your learning is actually really beneficial for students, and studies show that movement during lessons increased memory, increased attention span, even reading comprehension. All of those things are enhanced by movement and incorporating movement into your lessons. So even though you might be taking a little bit of time away from your instructional time to do some movement, the efficiency of your instructional time and the effectiveness of it will be tenfold, just because they've been up and moving around. They're more alert, they're more awake, they're more ready to learn and more regulated. So my project is, I will be creating calming and alerting movement breaks that will be available here on my YouTube channel for all of the teachers in 1st through 3rd grade. They can access them and then use them, and I really want them to be a tool for teachers. I don't want to add more to your plates, but a tool to work in collaboration, to incorporate student sensory systems in your classrooms. So one thing that you might want to look at is when to use an alerting movement break. You can use these when they've been seated for more than 20 minutes, when their head is on their desk, they're zoning out, swinging or tapping feet, standing without permission, talking out of turn. You see all of these things every single day, and this is a good time to use an alerting movement break. Studies say that a movement break in the morning and one in the afternoon is sufficient, or you can do more if they are not getting to go outside that day. But even just 2 movement breaks a day will really help regulate your students and incorporate their sensory system into your classroom. Okay, you might need to incorporate calming movement breaks if they've just returned from lunch or PE. So those are those really stimulating times where they're really keyed up and they can't settle down to do their addition or multiplication facts. You can really use a calming movement break in that time. Also, if you see students are swinging or tapping their feet, standing without permission, talking out of turn, these are signs that they're trying to give their body this stimulation, or they just need less stimulation to calm down. So these calming movement breaks where they're taking deep breaths, they're stretching, they have these long movements, those are really strategies that will help your students regulate, and so then they're ready to learn. So, the bottom line is movement matters. We all could use a little bit more movement in our lives. I know I could. My goal in this project is to work in collaboration with teachers to provide another tool for teachers to use and incorporate sensory interventions in the classroom and see what that does, if that affects behaviors or if it affects anything like that in the classroom. So thank you so much. If you would like to learn more, you can contact me at acfaust@uab.edu, or you can look at these references right here that I used for this presentation. Thank you.